Another power that the president has is very closely aligned to the power to inform and persuade. And that's the power to recommend. And recommending is simply just saying, I think you should do something. And this power that he has, a lot of it comes from he himself, the office holder. Because we can take a look at different presidents that served as president during very, very similar times. Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan, for example. Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan did not face very different situations in the country. We were in the middle of an economic crisis when Carter was there. Reagan came along right after Carter. We were still pretty much in the middle of this economic crisis. But Reagan was so much more successful than President Carter. A lot of that had to do with Carter's personality versus Reagan's personality. Another difference between presidents is whether the presidents have what we talked about earlier as a Whig outlook on presidential power or a Stewart outlook on presidential power. Two presidents that we've already talked about, Hoover and FDR. These two men had different personalities, different perspectives on what the president should be doing. A lot of times, presidents will come up with these grand ideas on how we're going to address issues in the country. FDR and his New Deal, LBJ and the New Society, or the War on Poverty. Those are ideas that the presidents came up with. But just because they came up with the ideas did not mean that Congress had to implement them. If Hoover had come up with the idea of the New Deal, I don't know if his personality and his perspective on what the president should do would have allowed him to implement the New Deal. Same exact thing with LBJ. I don't think of a president that was a little bit different in personality. LBJ was a very a formidable individual. I don't think if another personality had been the president at the time, whether or not they could have implemented the New Society, because it took a lot of coercion of Congress. It took a lot of, Congress willing to do what the president suggested or recommended. So the personality of the president really impacts how much power he's going to exercise. When we look at a new president, there's usually a period of time that we call his honeymoon period, which is right after he's elected, usually about the first 100 days after he's elected. And during that time period, the United States, the country as a whole, is kind of on a high. We just elected a new president. There's a new beginning. The president and all of the people that supported him are running around saying, hey, we've got this new president. The American people just elected him. There's this mandate. The American people want something to happen. So the president usually really uses this first 100 days to push Congress. And what we have seen in recent years is that the president will be evaluated usually right after his first 100 days. Watch when the president takes office in January. 100 days from the day that he's inaugurated, there'll be all kinds of news broadcasts and special shows measuring what the president was able to accomplish in his first 100 days. And a lot of times, if the president has a very difficult first 100 days, his presidency tends to be a little bit more difficult for him to accomplish things. This power to recommend is one that certain presidents utilize very effectively and other presidents don't. The final authorities that the president has that I'd like to talk about are three that are called inherent executive powers. And what we mean by inherent is these are powers that are just necessary in order for an executive to be successful. Executives inherit these powers or these authorities because they're so necessary. And these executive powers that we're going to talk about, the executive order, executive privilege, and the power to pardon, are, for the most part, unchallengeable by Congress. Congress, there's not a whole lot they can do about these actions or these powers that the president has. And the first one is an executive order. And an executive order is simply what it sounds like. It's the president, the chief executive of the country, issuing an order, telling somebody to do something. And generally when the president is issuing one of these executive orders, he's telling the bureaucrats how to implement or carry out some law that Congress has passed. And remember, when Congress passes a law and the president signs it, Congress cares about how it is implemented or carried out. So a lot of times Congress will write laws and they might be a little, unclear on something. And the president can come along and have some flexibility on how the law is carried out. And a really good example is when President Bill Clinton got elected, he had promised the gay community that he would do everything he could to ensure that they had the right to openly serve in the military. He had promised them that he would do his best to get a law passed that gave them the right to serve openly in the military. Well, he wasn't able to do that because he couldn't convince Congress to do it. But what he did was he issued an executive order called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And he basically told the people in the military, and the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, he issued an order saying, don't ask military members or people that are joining the military if they're gay. And he was telling the soldiers, don't tell anybody you're gay. And basically said you're allowed to serve in the military as long as you don't openly practice your homosexuality. Told the commanders, you can't go do investigations to try and find out if they're engaged in homosexual activity. There was very little that Congress could do about that because these executive orders have the force of law. If I violated an executive order, I could go to jail, just like if I violated a law. These executive orders tend to stay in effect until the president who issued them revokes them. The next president or a president in the future can revoke them. Congress could pass a law countervening them. Like Congress could have passed a law that said very clearly military commanders must ask, but they didn't do that. But if they had done that, the executive order would have been null and void. And the final way to get rid of an executive order is if the Supreme Court declares it unconstitutional. Most executive orders deal with very routine, everyday type things. There's actually a list of all of the executive orders that presidents have issued on the White House website. You can see every single executive order. And most of them deal with relatively insignificant parts of implementing laws. The next inherent executive power the president has is the power of executive privilege. We had talked a little bit about this when we talked about the difference between presidential cabinet members or department secretaries and presidential advisors. The president has a certain number of people around him that when he talks to them about conducting his job as president, those conversations are private. It's kind of like the privilege that I have or you have with our lawyer. If I tell my lawyer something or if you tell your lawyer something, the lawyer's not allowed to share that with anybody. Because in order for your lawyer to truly defend you, he has to have absolute truth from you. And if I'm afraid my lawyer is going to go tell somebody what I told them, then I'm less likely to give him the absolute truth. Same thing with the president. The president has to make some very, very difficult decisions. And we would like the president to be able to make these decisions based on absolutely truthful, unbiased answers. So there's a group of people around the president that have this absolute privilege, which means whatever they tell the president is protected. Now we have to be very careful that we understand that this power of executive privilege only deals with presidential conversations or presidential actions when it's related to them doing their job. When it was discovered that Richard Nixon was recording conversations in the Oval Office, he tried to claim executive privilege for those tapes. But what the Supreme Court said was anything that is directly related to being president would be protected under executive privilege. But if you're talking to your political advisors about being reelected, then that's not executive privilege. Bill Clinton tried to say that the relationship and what happened between him and Monica Lewinsky, he shouldn't have to release that information based on executive privilege. The Supreme Court said no, the relationship that you had with Monica Lewinsky when she was officially working for you was privileged, or could be privileged, but anything related to a personal relationship you had with Monica Lewinsky was not executive privilege. And the final executive power that the president has that's inherent in nature is the power to pardon. And when we say the president has the power to pardon, what that means is that the president has the ability to completely erase any crime that you commit. If I am laying on the execution gurney and there are tubes going into my arms and the federal government is getting ready to execute me and the president calls and pardons me, I am released from the execution chamber, I am not put to death, and I am released to go home, and it's like that crime never existed. The power to pardon is a huge power that the president has, and this goes all the way back to, back to biblical times and before. Remember the story of Jesus when he's standing in front of King Herod. King Herod says to the crowd, "Who should I pardon? Should I pardon this murderer, Barabbas, or should I let Jesus go?" And he was using his power to pardon. Presidents do the same thing. Presidents will usually use the power to pardon as they're leaving office. And when we say as they're leaving office, almost literally, as the president is walking out of the Oval Office for the last time, on his way to the limousine to go to the inauguration of the new president, he's signing pardons. And they do this at the last minute because once the person's no longer president, there's less political ramifications. So the president is going to be out of office before we discover all the pardons he gave, so there's less political controversy surrounding it. Now, understand that the president can only pardon a person for federal crimes. If I commit a crime that violates state law, the president can't pardon me. The governor can, because the governor is the chief executive, and the governor has the power to pardon. But understand these three inherent executive powers that the president has: executive orders, executive privilege, and the power to pardon. To wrap up this conversation about presidential authority and the checks that Congress have over the president, we need to think about the fact that some of these authorities that we gave the president in the Constitution and some of the powers that the president has accumulated over the years could be very, very, very abused. The president could abuse some of these powers and some of these authorities that he has, but very few presidents have done that. And the reason I believe they haven't done that is because the Constitution creates the ultimate check over presidential power and authority, and that's called impeachment and removal. Congress has the power to impeach and remove the president if the president has done something that they believe warrants his removal. And we as Americans are somewhat confused about this process because a lot of Americans believe that impeachment means the president is removed from office, and that is not true. The Constitution calls for two separate actions to take place when Congress believes the president has done something wrong. And the first thing is the process of impeachment. Impeachment is conducted by the House of Representatives, and it's the equivalent to a person being indicted for a crime or being charged with a crime. Just because I am charged with a crime and put on trial does not mean that I'm guilty. All it means is that I've been charged with a crime. That's the same thing when the president has been impeached. All that means is that the House of Representatives has voted and it just takes a simple majority to impeach the president, a simple majority of the House of Representatives has voted that they believe the president may have done something wrong that warrants him being charged with an impeachable offense. The impeachable offense does not have to be a crime. He doesn't have to have done something criminal. The U.S. Constitution is very vague on what's an impeachable offense. There was a huge conversation about the Bill Clinton-Monica Lewinsky situation as to whether or not the president did anything impeachable. And the big conversation was, well, many presidents have had sexual affairs while in office. So is that really an impeachable offense? It turns out that the House of Representatives did not impeach him for having an affair in the White House. They impeached him for perjuring himself, lying about that. So impeachment is simply when the House of Representatives, by a simple majority vote, says that we believe there's enough evidence that the president has done something impeachable. Now, if the House of Representatives does vote to impeach the president, then all of the evidence that was collected in the House impeachment hearing is sent to the Senate, and the Senate conducts an actual trial. No different than if I am indicted for a crime, then I am put on trial. And there's a judge in the impeachment trial of the president, and it's the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. There are lawyers defending the president. It's usually the White House counsel. And there are prosecutors, which are usually members of the House of Representatives that brought the charges of impeachment. And then there's a jury, and the jury is made up of the 100 senators. At the end of the trial, after all of the evidence is presented, after both sides have had their chance to present their side of the story, then the senators vote, and in order for the senators to remove a president from office, you must have 2/3 of the senators vote to convict and remove the president from office. In our history, since the United States Constitution was ratified, there have been 2 presidents impeached. Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton were both impeached. Neither president was removed from office. Bill Clinton's Senate trial wasn't even close. Most of the charges that Clinton faced, they didn't even receive a majority of the votes in the Senate. Andrew Johnson, on the other hand, came within 1 vote of being removed from office. If one more senator had voted to remove Andrew Johnson from office, he would have been convicted and removed. Now, Richard Nixon was never impeached because he resigned before he was impeached. But he resigned probably because he knew he was going to be impeached, and he knew that the Senate would vote to convict him. So Nixon resigned rather than face impeachment and removal from office. This power of impeachment that's given to Congress is a huge tool that Congress very well could have abused as well, because impeachment can be for a whole variety of things. If Congress believes you've done something impeachable, then Congress can impeach you. But to the credit of Congress, they have not used this power of impeachment too liberally. They only use it when they absolutely have to. As a matter of fact, when Bill Clinton was impeached, there was a lot of discussion about that being a political maneuver by the Republicans. Well, when George Bush, the second George Bush, was elected after Bill Clinton, when we go to war against Iraq, and the Republicans and George Bush is claiming all of these weapons of mass destruction, there were a number of Democrats in the House of Representatives that were screaming for George Bush's impeachment when it turns out there weren't weapons of mass destruction. The Democrats had control of the House at the time. Again, I believe the Democrats made a wise choice in not impeaching George Bush, because if they had impeached George Bush, it would have appeared like it was, just to get back for them at the Republicans for impeaching Bill Clinton, and then we would have had this political use of the impeachment power. But this power is a huge power that's used to hold over the president's head. One last thing about impeachment, we have to realize that the power to impeach is not limited just to the president. Congress can impeach any federal judge, the president, or any federal bureaucrat. As a matter of fact, the most common use of the impeachment power by Congress has been to remove federal judges from the bench. We talk about federal judges serving for life during terms of good behavior. If a federal judge does something wrong, Congress can go through the same process that they go through with the president. The House of Representatives impeaches, then the Senate will conduct a trial, and if the Senate, 2/3 of the Senate, find this person guilty, then this person, the judge, is removed from office.